We're a fully managed secure web hosting company. We specialize in hosting everyone from political blogs to large organizations that have PCI and HIPAA type data. So we host some of the most hack-attempted websites in the world. To give you a little bit of background on myself, I came out of college as a web developer. So I learned PHP, I did WordPress, I did Drupal, HTML, CSS, the whole nine. But I kept getting pulled into the support realm to help identify web application attacks. As time went on, as we hosted more and more websites, we were noticing more and more web application layer attacks. So being a developer, I was able to actually look at the payload. I was able to correlate that to requests. So I ended up going into support full time, and now I'm in security, actually researching new technology and implementing that to help protect our customers. So today we're going to talk about knocking out application layer and open source threats as it relates to web hosting. And I'm kind of basing my talk on open source CMS, WordPress, Joomla type stuff, but you can apply this to other open source software as well. Before we get started, this isn't a sales pitch. I'm a security engineer, not a sales rep, so I'm not trying to sell you anything, but FireHost is unique in the sense that all the security products you're familiar with, all of the security technologies, we actually implement those for our customers. So we have some experience in the field. We want you to learn from our experience, apply that to your environment so you can be a little safer. In fact, probably in the next 30 minutes, we'll probably block at least 5,000 SQL injections and mitigate a couple DOS attacks. So it's a serious problem, and obviously it's only getting worse. Here's a few interesting statistics over the past few years. 82% of websites have at least one security issue. That can be anything from weak SSL ciphers. But 63% of those 82% have an issue of high critical or urgent severity, which means that those vulnerabilities can be easily exploited to gain access to the system, the source code, even your sensitive data. This middle statistic here kind of blew me away. Out of the top 100 most popular websites on the whole internet, 70% at one time or another have either hosted malicious content or contain a mass redirect to a malicious site. I'm sure most of you guys have visited some of those sites. I know I've probably visited at least 20 of those. Is anybody in here having to meet PCI DSS requirements for their data? Okay, we got a couple. For PCI DSS requirements, anybody that stores credit card information or processes that credit card information has to meet a set of what's essentially kind of a baseline or a common sense type set of requirements, but it's PCI DSS requirements. So when you shop online, your data has to be encrypted, it has to be stored encrypted. There's a whole set of regulations, but 80% of those websites that need to meet those requirements and the website don't. So what we really need to understand is how the game's changing. How is web application security getting worse? My clicker's not working. So over the past few years, we've seen a large rise in application level attacks. These are the type of attacks that are attacking your web forms, your contact forms, your WordPress, your Drupal admin, login forms. Anything that's posting data can be vulnerable. And as some of you know, the best way to protect a service is to shut that service off at the firewall, block it from the internet. But unfortunately, we serve websites, so we have to punch holes in the firewall for 80 and 443, just HTTP and HTTPS. Traditional firewalls don't block web attacks. It's either an on or off switch, so you're opening that port or you're closing that port. I've listed a few web application attacks here. Some of you may be familiar with some. We've got SQL injection, cross-site scripting, directory traversal, cookie tampering. The list goes on and on and on, but this list can contain up to thousands of different web attacks. We have web attacks that are specifically tailored to WordPress, specifically tailored to Drupal, to Joomla. There's tons and tons of vulnerabilities out there. Some of us are also bound, like this gentleman here, by PCI DSS requirements, by HIPAA type regulations, SAS70 type 2, FISMA. So not only are we worried about the hackers, but sometimes we're worried about the feds as well. So we have to kind of balance the two, and we kind of find ourselves between a rock and a hard place sometimes, so it can be difficult. And I don't know if you're familiar with this either, but the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has a policy in responding to data breaches. If you store personally identifiable information like a name correlated to an address or correlated to a phone number, something as simple as that can be considered personally identifiable information. So they have this federally named HHS, OCIO, yada yada. So if you don't follow that policy and your personally identifiable information is breached and you don't follow that policy, you could be subject to federal legal fines, possibly even jail time. So that's just something to keep in mind. So obviously, we've determined the web application is your largest threat. And here's a graph taken from the Verizon and United States Secret Service data breach investigation report last year. This is just one graph out of the whole report. But based on all these attack vectors, your wireless network is listed, physical access, backdoors, network file sharing, Trojans and remote access, and your web application. Over 54% of all attacks are attacking your web application layer. 92% of web application attacks, so nearly all web application attacks, result in 90% of all record access. So they're getting your records from attacking your web application. The reason that is sure, a hacker can target, Sally in HR or someone else's computer in your company. They can get access to it, social engineering, however they do that. But that computer or that system that they've compromised is not necessarily attached to the information they're after. It's not necessarily attached to the database. But almost 100% of the time, your web application is going to be attached to that data, so that's why that's so successful. So how are these hackers getting in? Why are web application attacks, especially on open source, on the rise over the years? This graph right here is a Google Trends graph over the last 7 years for Drupal, Joomla, WordPress, and I threw Expression Engine as well, just to illustrate a point. Expression Engine, as some of you may know, is a .NET limited source CMS. It's free to install. It's free to use unless you want to do something substantial. Then you have to pay a commercial version. It doesn't follow the open source model, obviously. So you can see the growth is relatively stagnant over the last few years since that's come out. But Drupal, Joomla, WordPress, we all know open source is on the rise. But the catch-22 here is, first of all, we've got access to the full source code. We're able to look at every single function. We're able to look at how things operate. We're able to augment that functionality, contribute, and go from there. But the hackers have the same visibility into the code, so they're able to basically get the blueprints to the building, if you will. They're able to see every single function of the code, every bit of code that you're able to see. They're able to identify vulnerabilities. And they're not always going to release those vulnerabilities publicly. They're going to use them to their advantage and use that to get into the system. So over the years, as we've been doing secure web hosting, we've identified two high-level hacker profiles, the egomaniac and the criminal. Two totally opposite types of attackers. The egomaniac, sometimes referred to as a script kiddie, will use automated tools, something simple. Their goal is to get into your source code, deface your website, and draw attention to themselves. Everything they do is about bringing attention to themselves. The criminal is who you have to be worried about. These are the guys that actually get into your system, and their whole MO is to not set off alarms. They're trying to stay stealthy, and everything they do revolves around making a profit. So these guys could potentially be in your system for months or years before you even find out about it. So let's get into a few examples of real-life scenarios and what kind of impact it caused to the companies. So TechCrunch.com is a popular technology blog. They have millions of subscribers. They were just acquired by AOL last year, I believe. But they serve millions in ad revenue. Early last year, they got a little greedy. They put a full-page ad before you visited the site, so everybody had to click through a full-page ad. And with millions of subscribers, you can imagine the backlash that they received from the community. In fact, one guy got so pissed off, he actually hacked the website and replaced their whole homepage with the word "hi." Essentially cutting off their whole revenue stream. So Michael Arrington, the founder of TechCrunch, was a little flippant on Twitter, and he said, the Chinese hacked us, maybe. Then an hour later, he said, okay, it wasn't the Chinese, it was the Canadians. The Canadians hacked us. But apparently the hacker didn't like this so much, so he went and modified the source code further and put a bunch of profane message to Michael, taunting him for not being able to make ad revenue. So you can see the impact financially it had to Twitter, and obviously a little bit of the reputation as well. Some of you guys here are developers. You might be familiar with Nathan Smith. He is the author of 960 Grid System, which is basically a CSS micro framework that allows developers and designers to quickly create 960 pixel wide CSS layouts. But his website runs on text pattern CMS. In fact, Nathan co-wrote a book on text pattern CMS, so he understands how the CMS works. He understands HTML and CSS, obviously. He's not a rookie by any means. He's a seasoned professional web developer. So one day, Nathan came to us, and he was noticing his SEO rankings dropping in Google, his relevancy rankings. So he did a little bit of research on his own, and he went to Google, searched for 960 grid system, and sure enough, his website came up, you know, the top 4 or 5 results. But in the description, there were a bunch of spam links. It said, buy Viagra this, buy these pills, buy that pill. So it's just a bunch of junk spam links. So he clicked on one of those links, went to his website, and from what he could tell, there was nothing wrong. It pulled up his website, everything was fine. So we did a little bit of research for him, and it looks like the hacker injected some JavaScript into the site, which basically parsed the user agent when someone visited the site. And for those that aren't familiar with a user agent, it's just an HTTP header that's passed with a web request that allows the web server to see what browser you're using, whether it's Firefox, Internet Explorer, Safari, whatever the case may be. Now, if a Google search bot or a Yahoo search bot, Bing search bot, some web crawler comes to the website, they have a unique user agent that specifies that they're a web crawler. So the JavaScript would parse the user agent header, and depending on whether or not it was a search bot, it would display different content. So if it was a normal user, if you were to visit the site, you'd see 960 grid system, you'd be able to use the site like normal. But if a search engine crawler came to the site, it would basically inject some CSS to Nathan's content, a display none for those that know CSS, and then inject a bunch of spam links, effectively raising the relevancy for the hacker's actual spam site and making him more money, at the same time hurting Nathan's SEO rankings.